What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going to the latest Detroit Lions news. And today is probably the least fun that I've had in free agency to this point. I've had a blast jumping on here talking about the latest signings and getting excited about those additions. Rightfully so. I think we've made some excellent additions. But today, to see a guy like Josh Reynolds, who I thought for sure this guy was going to get re-signed, has reportedly signed with the Denver Broncos on a 2-year deal worth up to $14 million. It is the most disappointed that I've been in free agency to this point. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And I hate this, to be honest with you. With other signings, I don't necessarily do videos on if a guy goes and signs elsewhere. But this was the big one. This is one that we also talked about yesterday. And Dan Campbell told us that they were still in contact with Josh Reynolds. So we did the little video there. That was the main topic of that video. And then today we get this news. And it always feels right that I'm here to report and talk about this news a little bit. But this also feels like a really good opportunity to kind of dive into the Lions' current financial situation a little bit. Dive into the cap space a little bit at this spot. Because right now there's still a lot of unknowns. And a lot of that ties back to the Cam Sutton situation, which we got a little background information on what happened with the Cam Sutton situation a little bit there in terms of the fact that he was in the facility when it was posted out on social media that they were looking for him. They talked to him. He left the building, and the Detroit Lions decided to release him post June 1st designation. As they laid out, it wasn't like a financial move. It was like, hey, we're opening up cap space because of how you played last year. It was simply the off the field thing. The Detroit Lions decided to make that move, and we understand all of that. But I think there could be a factor of that plays into this because the cap space is super important. It's like, hey, what do you have financially to spend? Everybody has a cap space, so it is worth bringing up in this video, and I'll kind of make more sense of that in a second. But first off, just to address the news, man, Denver, y'all got a good one. Y'all got a good one, and it's tough. This stinks. The 29-year-old receiver that was coming off statistically his best season with the Lions, but I have some interesting numbers to throw to that because when I dove into this, right, we know that he's coming off a really strong season, 600-plus yards, 40 receptions. Was good in the playoffs up till the San Fran game, which was rough. Outside of that, very reliable hands on the season. I thought what he did for our offense ever since he stepped in, right, as a guy that we picked up off the waivers middle season 2021, he made a huge difference for this offense and for Jared Goff in particular. He was huge for this team. The toughness, the blocking, the route smarts, right? He has a lot of savvy to his game. Timing is there. And you know exactly what you're going to get out of Josh Reynolds. And man, I'll tell you what, I'm going to miss those over-the-shoulder 15, 20-yard passes to Josh. There's nothing like it. It's butter, man. It's so smooth. Oh my goodness, I can think of him. At Carolina, we were at that. It was the one game I went to in person. You just see that one over. Like that's it. That's the one right there. And to not get to see that anymore is going to be tough. But as we said, why is Josh Reynolds still available? And my belief was because I thought he was the top receiver on the market, especially after Marquise Brown was gone. But I think you could have made a case that you would take Josh over Brown. And the deal that he's reportedly getting is nothing crazy. I mean, this is kind of what everybody thought the number was going to fall in the range of $7 million per year. We don't know how this is set up, how much is guaranteed. Those are things that we don't know at this point in time. At least I don't as the time of recording this. But the number is not crazy. It's not like he got a ridiculous amount of money that no one was expecting. But it was a solid payday. And for a guy at his age coming off of that season, you could understand why he would be looking for maybe the best deal that he can get. Maybe it was simply that he just wanted to go play elsewhere. I don't know if that's true or not. Could be. I don't know. But maybe it was just like, hey, they had the best deal for Josh Reynolds. And I wanted to dive into that because I think it's interesting. Before we get to it, though, from the Lions cap side of things, first off, I will say this. When the Lions re-signed Josh Reynolds after being there for that half season, 19 receptions, 300 yards, he was such a big impactful piece. The Lions re-signed him, and obviously the cap changes, so it's difficult to be one-to-one here because the cap has risen. But when the Lions re-signed him, they signed him to a 2-year, $6 million deal, $2 million cap hit the first season, and $4 million cap hit this past season. So when they re-signed him on a relatively cheap deal, and that's because it was such a small sample size. But obviously with the Lions, he was kind of the same player every single week. You knew exactly what you were going to get, so he was great for us, right? He's not your elite number one receiver, but he's very reliable as an outside wide receiver, but gave us flexibility, gave us versatility with his route intelligence to move around the formation. You knew exactly what you were going to get from the player. However, I bring that up because when you look at it statistically from just a per-game perspective, and even in that small sample size with the Lions, which is a little bit difficult to do this, but if you do that, and you look at his numbers, you could argue that per game, he was more effective in 2021 than he has been in the regular season alone up to this point as a Lion, meaning that in 2021 and 2022, he had the same, and it was the highest as a Detroit Lion, same in terms of receptions per game. In 2021, he had highest yards per game. In 2021, he was tied for the highest with this past year in touchdowns per game. So statistically speaking, while the total numbers look better in terms of a per game side of things, and some of that's just the weapons they have around. We were kind of limited. St. Brown came along late there. But in terms of like a per game side of things, you could argue he's most effective in that small sample size when we first brought him in here. So outside of the salary cap just rising, I guess you could have like, oh, why did the cap number get higher? But I just think that's something worth pointing out, that could be something the Lions definitely looked into as well. But I think they wanted Josh Reynolds back. I really do. I think they wanted him back. But I want to look at this from a financial side because I don't know all the ins and outs. Maybe we'll have more information on why this happened, why it didn't happen, right? How each side felt about this. However, the financial side of this to me makes everything super interesting. And I think we kind of got a tell to this. At least I'm looking at this as kind of like a tell when we saw the Kevin Zeitler deal. So I'm going to throw this up now. And this is Spotrac. Again, some of the information, it feels like it could be a little bit off here because we're kind of just waiting to see what happens with the Cam Sutton situation. Lions designated as a post-June 1st cut, meaning they could spread out now, that dead cap that they're going to have to deal with. So specifically from the signing bonus, Spotrac at just over $8 million that spread out through multiple void years, that would be just dead cap if he was cut pre-June 1st, but because it's post-June 1st, now you spread it out, and according to Spotrac, right, that $2.18 million, which would be year by year by year, is what you're going to be due now, but then after that, next season, now you have to be due the rest, so that, 2.183 times 3, which would put you at like $6.5 million, is what the Lions would have in dead cap next year.
Now, as you can see, a large portion of this that we're kind of waiting on is the $10.5 million guaranteed, and shout out to Pride of Detroit for this article. $10.5 million, the base salary that was guaranteed, where the Detroit Lions are looking to NFL to look at this situation and deem whether or not he broke a code of conduct, and the Detroit Lions can be relieved of that $10.5 million base salary that became guaranteed. Because as you can see here by what we were told from Rod Wood, the Detroit Lions weren't made aware of this situation until we were made aware of the situation, which is why the Amik Robertson thing worked out so well for us. But they weren't made aware, so when they went to Cam Sutton about the situation, tried to advise him to kind of turn himself in, and it was clear that it was not going to happen, the Detroit Lions just released him. So that's really the big number, I guess, that we're waiting on here is kind of what happens with the base salary situation. But we know in terms of the signing bonus, the Lions are on the hook for that.
Kind of have some salary cap relief for this season with kind of the surprise situation that popped up there. It's one of the kind of tell signs, because when I look at this, if we were looking at it from a financial side, and you said, okay, it came down to the money side of things, and that's what I'm going to look at it from here. Came down to the money side of things. Financially here, here's really the key that stands out, and this was one thing that I thought was interesting, but then looking at the dates of when these things kind of took place was the Kevin Zeitler contract, because one thing that stood out to me is that now we have the details on the Kevin Zeitler contract, and you can see $5.94 million would be his cap hit. But what the Detroit Lions did not do to that high of a cap hit was throw void years on the contracts, and typically they do that. And we're going to talk about this more here, is that when you look at with a lot of the Lions deals, if they're a multi-year deal, most of the time, you get a situation where the Lions are going to backload those contracts. So early in the contract, much lower cap number. As the contract goes on, we're going to see them kind of go up. David Montgomery, Alex Anzalone, good examples of that next season and this season. But then you also look at a guy like Cam Sutton, who would have fallen into that category. However, now he's been released post-June 1st with the situation, so it kind of throws some things off a little bit. But that's typically what the Lions do with multi-years deals. But typically with one-year deals, especially if the cap hit's going to be a little bit higher, we're going to see the Lions spread out that cap number through void years. You could even look at the Carlton Davis situation, for example, and say, hey, the Lions took that and they ended up restructuring the deal because he had a high base salary. That way they could lower that cap number for that immediate season. And then they just created void years because there was no multi-year deal there in that situation. That's typically what the Lions do. So I thought when I saw the Kevin Zeitler situation is that maybe the Lions were sitting back and looking at it and saying, okay, for 2024, we don't want to put more money onto next season because now we took this post-June 1st cut. And what we know right now, we're going to have to deal with, right, the $6.5 million in dead cap next season. So instead of putting more money there, we are not going to throw a void year onto his contract. But looking at the dates, I believe that the situation was Cam Sutton was released after the Detroit Lions ended up signing Kevin Zeitler. So that wouldn't have been something that they would have been made aware of. They would have just made that deal without knowing of that situation. But with the way that the Lions set up the contract for Kevin Zeitler, they decided not to put void years. So they're just going to take on that cap hit for this season. So what I'll talk about, and I'll cut to that clip here in a second, where I'm going to kind of take a look at some of the situations of what the Lions have to deal with and what they're going to have to start paying starting in 2025. I also will throw in Carlton Davis, which I did not bring up, and the Marcus Davenport's, again, the one-year deals, which you already have void years, but if the Lions are going to look to extend, you have that number plus, of course, that extension as well. But now I think that there definitely could be some concern with where the Lions' cap space is. Not necessarily concern, but it's something that they have to be aware of where their cap situation is. You can see here on Spotrac, they have them with $21.6 million in cap space, which is not bad. But, of course, then you have to also throw in the draft class, which as they have lifted, the top 51 would then count towards $5.7 million. So you drop down to $15 to $16 million in cap space. So you have that to deal with. And a big part of that for them on Spotrac is they're counting that you have to deal with the $2.18 million in signing bonus plus that entire base salary, which became guaranteed. So you have that $12.68 million cap hit that you're dealing with. Again, that's where a big portion of that is something the Lions are going to have to figure out is, okay, are we actually going to have to deal with this entire number or not? Because we already have the situation of, the post-June 1st cut, which, for example, have to wait for some of that salary cap relief, which in the meantime would be the $8.72 million in total because you're not actually getting that 2.18 knocked off. So that, again, lowers your salary cap a little bit further. So the Lions are kind of waiting on trying to figure out what that situation is going to look like for the NFL. There could be a little bit of like, hey, salary cap-wise, we don't have the most space right now, especially after this Cam Thun thing just kind of popped up. So even with us saying, let's make this a post-June 1st cut, big part of that is the fact that $10.5 million in base salary became guaranteed, so we have to deal with that as well. So we really don't know what that answer is going to be. And in the meantime, the best thing that we could do to try to relieve stress will be, hey, we're going to make this a post-June 1st cut to sign up kind of that signing bonus, make that spread out in terms of dead cap. But yet we still have to wait on that because it's a post-June 1st cut for free agency and those things where you're going to be at financially. So for the Lions here, I think there is some potential, like, hey, legitimacy to looking at what is that cap number was going to be with Josh Reynolds? Because even if they backload that deal, you still have to deal with that up front. But now just backloading that deal isn't as cut and dry as like, hey, that's what the Lions typically do. Just make it a slower cap number this season, and then next year we'll just raise it. Well, I'm going to talk about what that issue would be because if the Lions typically do that, his cap number is going to be very high with it next season. But then you also throw in the fact that the Lions are now having to pay things going forward. Like they haven't had to deal with this before, as Dan Campbell kind of touched on, is that now you're going to have to start with to deal with these draft classes. So with the Cam Sutton thing just kind of popping up on the Lions, and then Kevin Zeitler, who was signed before we knew this, for the Lions, I think they definitely have to worry about where they're at financially currently, which could have had an impact on this because the Lions, it's not as simple as let's just backload it because, hey, guess what? You're going to have to start paying things. So then it's like, well, let's just front load it. Well, there's still a lot of unknown in terms of how much cap space we're actually going to be at for the Lions here. So I think that this is a real impact. It could have a real impact on the situation. But what about 2025? That to me seems like the interesting aspect in all of this is where the Lions could be sitting back saying to themselves, this isn't about what the cap number is going to look like now, but instead what that cap number is going to look like next year. Now, maybe the Lions could have just had a higher cap number this season, though they don't have the most cap space. Again, we're kind of waiting to figure out the Cam Sutton situation, but it could have been that aspect. Spotrac has us like $21 million in cap space. I think that could be a little bit thrown off, though, again, because we're kind of waiting on the Cam Sutton situation, but they have us at like $21 million. It's not a ton of cap space, especially when you consider then the draft coming up and guys along the road that you're going to want to add to the team. Oh, that's only the top 51, though, so let me make that clear. Aspect of also the Detroit Lions having a lot of deals next season, one, that are expiring, like big types of deals, so they've got new things that they're going to have to start to spend on. We talk about draft class. For the first time, we're going to have to start re-signing our first draft class, but then you also have the aspect of how the Lions are backloading contracts. Now, there's potential outs, mainly between Alex Anzalone and David Montgomery, but two guys they look at as core pieces. I don't know that they're in a rush to get off of either of those guys. You could argue DJ Reader, too, probably won't be in a rush to get off of that guy either. So there's potential outs next season. It's not like they don't have any flexibility, but those aren't guys that I would think that they're going to want to move off of.
Now, when you look at a graphic like this, let me make this clear. This is not like completely updated because this is something I just made during the offseason like a while back. But when you do look at this, you can still see kind of the visuals of some of the big one-year deals. I didn't even bring up the fact that Taylor Decker's on a void year, so you have to make a decision with him next season. Obviously, Zeitler, guys like that, you'll have to make a decision on. But there's deals like that where it's not even just draft picks. Of course, it's to Jared Goff, but it's also then the void years that you have on contract.
So if we're just looking at it from a financial side of things, this could have been the Lions sitting back and saying, hey, it's more about 2025. Look at it, and you can see on the right side of the screen right now, this is 2024. You see that cap percentage? How much this cap number is taking of your cap space, right? Now, as you can see with these numbers, let's just say hypothetically, and again, the Lions probably would have done this differently. Let's say hypothetically, though, it was a $7 million cap hit this season, right? That would have put Josh Reynolds at 2.7% of the cap, which would have placed him right here between Montgomery and Alex Anzalone. But the Lions probably would have lowered that. And if they would have done something similar to what they usually do, and if you go to 2025 and we update this, let's say, for example, maybe his cap number rose to 7, but let's say it rose to 9. Let's say it rose to $9 million. And again, this could be a much of a reach, but if it did, that would be 3.4% of the cap based on what the projections are. Now, again, this is using over the cap, so they could be a little bit off here. But the point is that 3.4% will put you between guys like Hutchinson and Glasgow. So you see, then he'd have one of the highest cap percentages next season. And as we always say, it's all about timing. It's all about timing. So with the way that the Lions set up contracts, and when you look at that, it does make me think that if this came down to financials, and it may not have, but if it did, that the Lions could have sat back and said, either one, they weren't expecting to cap what he was getting, which was 2 years, $14 million, to get that high, which I would be a little surprised by, because I think that's what a lot of people expected, especially with how long this kind of went on. But then also on top of that, it definitely could have been a line saying it's not necessarily about this year and can we afford him. It's about next year. We know what we are going to have to pay to certain spots. And if his cap number, say, is like that $9 million, like he's going to have one of the highest cap percentages next season. And I don't know if the Lions were on board with that, considering a lot of your cap numbers are already going to rise next season. So again, we're on 2025 here. So you can see DJ Reader, cap number rises. Again, you could get out of it, but his cap number is going to rise. Hutchinson will rise through his rookie deal. Graham Glasgow rises. Alex rises. Montgomery rises. That's how they set up deals. Amik Robertson rises on the second year. That's how they set up deals. But now you also throw in the effect that a lot of your core pieces, for the first time now, you have to pay them. So again, while that first year the cap number could be lower, it doesn't mean it's going to be super high. It probably won't be. But that's where Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? You're getting into that entire first year draft class. That's not even including, Jared Goff. And even though Goff's already had a pretty high cap hit, so that shouldn't be like a massive difference. Oh, I think that you could look at it from a financial side and see where the Lions may have looked at this from a 2-year plan and said that maybe they, depending on what discussions were there, maybe there was like a limit to how far they were willing to go for that 2024 season. It's been as simply as, Josh Reynolds wanted to go elsewhere. The Lions didn't want to get to that price point. They just didn't come to a deal, whatever that may be, or the Lions really like what they have in the receiver room, which we saw an expanded role to J-Mo, but you also then brought back Peoples-Jones. Like, I still like the Lions receiver room at this spot, but it definitely now means that hitting the draft, you can absolutely draft a receiver anywhere in the draft, in my opinion. You could probably draft multiple if you wanted to. There's also the aspect I will say, we haven't talked about it a lot because we haven't seen much, and I think that this was the player that coming out of the draft, his lowest grade for me was route running. I thought he needed so much polish, but if you were just talking about a physical build and physical traits, when you had drafted Antoine Green, though he was a day 3 pick out of North Carolina, he did check a lot of boxes, especially as a level 3 target, similarly to what Josh Reynolds would bring to the table. So I'm not saying that they're looking at Green as like that's their answer for Josh Reynolds. But if you were just looking at from a trait side of things and where Josh Reynolds typically has success with us, though he opened up every kind of level of the route tree, he won some quick underneath passes as well. But release isn't necessarily his biggest strength. Getting off the line of scrimmage, Peoples-Jones showed some of that impact to go win one-on-one on an island. There's limitations with Josh Reynolds, but he was very successful level 2, level 3. Antoine Green, he fits into that mold of having that kind of role potentially in the future, and that's where he could find his success in the NFL. His tracking ability is pretty impressive, and that was one thing about Josh that people loved coming out of the draft when he was drafted. His tracking ability was big time, so he does check a lot of kind of similar traits. He just need to polish up his route running, and we didn't see him much last year, so it's hard to really go off anything there, but you could look at the Lions receiver room, take that, and then also what they have outside of it. I like the Lions receiver room. I think they'll draft somebody. They may draft multiple. I don't think it has to be a top pick. I don't believe that just because you lost Josh Reynolds. But at the same time, if the Lions went into a game, I think they'd be fine at receiver, though I think they're definitely going to address it, especially after not having Josh Reynolds back. I mean, I guess you could still tap on something in free agency, but I would expect they're going to draft somebody in this draft at the receiver position. I think it could now happen anywhere in the draft. So overall, man, this is a tough one. I'm a huge Josh Reynolds fan, so this one hurts to see. I'm sure Jared Goff doesn't love this either necessarily. I'm a little surprised. I'm pretty surprised that this happened, so that's why I want to talk about the financial side a little bit there. But overall, that's how this stuff goes. That's how it goes. So this is just free agency. But wishing Josh Reynolds the best of luck, man, going forward. And for the Lions side of things, again, I don't really have any concerns about where we're at, right? This was always a possibility. But I definitely think that the draft has now for sure opened up that they can go anywhere in the draft. I mean, either way, they probably could have. But with Josh back, it would have been like, okay, you could draft someone, but we kind of know who our guys are. Next year now, you could definitely open it up to going anywhere. Don't think it has to be top pick, but it could be anywhere in the draft. But I was just keeping an eye on Antoine Green, and I think Antoine is even a little bit better after the catch, arguably, than Josh Reynolds. So I'll just make that point. But I'm going to leave that there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching.